Frank Morrison sat in his old, wooden chair on the front porch of his ranch house and watched the sun set over the Montana hills. The sky turned orange and pink while he sipped his coffee from a mug that said "World's Best Dad." His alien son, Zektar, had given him that mug 20 years ago when he was still young and full of love for the human who saved his life. Things were different now. The sound of arguing voices came from inside the house. Zektar was fighting with his mate Valana again about something. Their two children were probably hiding in their rooms like they always did when their parents got loud. Frank knew he should go inside and try to help, but he was tired of being the peacekeeper. At 68 years old, he felt every day of his age in his bones. The front door opened with a bang and Zektar stepped outside. He was tall like all Caltharians, with blue metallic skin that shined in the evening light. His eyes glowed with anger and his long fingers moved in sharp gestures as he spoke. "Frank, we need to talk," Zektar said in his deep voice. The translator device in his throat made his English sound perfect, but cold. Frank did not look up from his coffee. "What about now?" "About this house and this land and your future here with us." Frank finally looked at his adopted son. 25. Years ago, he had found Zektar as a small injured child next to a crashed alien ship in the back pasture. The boy was dying and scared and alone. Frank took him home and nursed him back to health. He taught him English and human ways. He loved him like his own blood son, even when the government agents came asking questions. Even when the neighbors whispered and stared. Even when Zektar's own people came looking for him years later. "My future?" Frank asked. Valana appeared in the doorway behind Zektar. She was beautiful in the alien way, with silver hair and large dark eyes. She had never liked Frank much even after all these years. She thought humans were simple and weak. She made that clear in small ways every day. "Yes," Zektar said. "We have been talking and we think it is time for you to move somewhere more suitable for someone your age." Frank set down his coffee mug slowly. "More suitable? You struggle with the new technology in the house. You cannot understand the holographic controls we installed. You move slowly and forget things. Yesterday you could not figure out how to use the food maker." "The food maker is broken half the time anyway," Frank said quietly. "It is not broken. You simply do not understand advanced Caltharian technology," Valana said from the doorway. Her voice was sharp like broken glass. Zektar continued. "There are nice places in town for elderly humans. Places where you can be with others like you. Places where the technology is simple and you will not feel so lost. Others like me," Frank repeated. "Yes, old humans who cannot keep up with progress." Frank looked around at his land. His family had owned this ranch for 3 generations. His grandfather built the original house with his own hands. Frank had modernized it over the years and added rooms when Zektar grew up. When Zektar brought Valana home as his mate, Frank built them their own wing of the house. When their children were born, he converted the barn into a playroom for them. "This is my home," Frank said. "But you are becoming a burden," Zektar said, the words like they were simple facts. "We love you, but we cannot take care of you and run our business and raise our children. It is too much." The children appeared behind their mother in the doorway. Little Kexra was only 8 in human years, but she was smart like all Caltharian children. Her brother Morlin was 12 and already taller than most human adults. They both looked at Frank with something that might have been pity or shame. He could not tell which was worse. "A burden," Frank said. "Yes, we did not want to say it so directly, but you asked." Frank stood up from his chair. His knees hurt, but he stood straight and tall. "I see. There is a very nice facility in town called Golden Years. They have human food and human entertainment. You would be much happier there with people who understand you better." Valana nodded. "It is for the best. You will see." Frank looked at each of them. Zektar avoided his eyes. Valana looked proud, like she had won something important. The children just stared at the floor. "When do you want me to leave?" Frank asked. "We thought maybe next month. That gives you time to pack your personal things." "My personal things?" "Yes. Your clothes and books and that old photo album you like so much." Frank walked to the porch railing and put his hands on the wood he had cut and shaped himself 40 years ago. And everything else stays here. Well, yes. The house and land and all the improvements we have made. This will always be the family home. Frank nodded slowly. The family home. You understand, Zektar said with relief. I knew you would. You always were reasonable about these things. Frank turned around and looked at his alien son. I understand perfectly. He walked past all of them into the house and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. He closed the door behind him and sat on the bed where he had slept for 40 years. On. The knitstand was a photo of him and young Zektar on the day Frank taught him to ride a horse. Zektar was laughing in the picture and hugging Frank's neck. Frank remembered that day like it was yesterday. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Betty Harris Law Office. Betty, it's Frank Morrison. Frank, how are you doing? I haven't heard from you in months. I'm doing fine. Betty, but I need your help with something important. Of course, what can I do for you? Frank looked out his bedroom window at the land his family had owned for 90 years. I need to sell my ranch, all of it, as fast as possible. Betty Harris drove up to Frank's ranch 3 days later in her old blue truck. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had been Frank's lawyer and friend for 20 years. She handled his will and his taxes and helped him when government people came asking questions about his alien family. Betty never judged him for the choices he made. Frank, are you sure about this? She asked as they sat in his kitchen. This ranch has been in your family for generations. Frank poured her coffee in one of his regular cups. The good ones with the fancy Caltharian designs were for family meals and special occasions. I'm sure, but where will you live? What will Zektar and his family do? That's their problem now, Frank said. They made it clear I'm just a burden. So I'm removing the burden. Betty studied his face. What happened, Frank? He told her about the conversation on the porch, about being called a burden in front of the children, about how they assumed everything he owned would just become theirs when he moved to the old folks' home. Those ungrateful. Betty stopped herself. I'm sorry, Frank. I know you love them. I do love them. But love doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Betty nodded. So you want to sell everything? The house, the land, all too? 1,000 acres. Everything. I want it done fast and legal and final. That's a lot of land, Frank. It might take time to find a buyer willing to pay fair price for the whole thing. Frank smiled for the first time in days. I already found a buyer. The next morning, a military truck drove up the long driveway to Frank's house. Zektar was in the barn working on his trading ship when he heard the engine. He came outside to see 3 humans in uniform getting out of the truck. One was a tall man with short brown hair and colonel's bars on his shirt. Can I help you? Zektar asked in his careful English. I'm Colonel Jake Sullivan with the Terran Defense Initiative. I'm here to see Frank Morrison. He is my adoptive father. What do you want with him? Business, the colonel said simply. Frank came out of the house and walked over to shake hands with the soldiers. Jake, good to see you again. Frank, been too long. Zektar watched his father talk with these military humans like they were old friends. He had never seen Frank act so comfortable around strangers. Zektar, meet Colonel Sullivan. We served together in the Mars Colony Wars 30 years ago. Zektar's eyes widened. He had never known Frank was a soldier. Frank never talked about his life before finding Zektar. Your father was the best engineer. In the Corps, Sullivan said. Saved a lot of lives with his quick thinking. I did not know, Zektar said quietly. Frank's smile was cold. There's a lot you don't know about me, son. The soldiers followed Frank into the house. Zektar tried to follow, but Frank closed the door firmly behind them. For 2 hours they talked while Zektar waited outside feeling confused and worried. When the soldiers finally left, Frank seemed happier than he had been in months. What did they want? Zektar asked. They made me an offer on the ranch. An offer? The TDI wants to buy all 2,000 acres to build a new training facility. A place where human and alien soldiers can learn to work together. Zektar felt cold fear in his stomach. But this is our home. No, Frank said calmly. This is my home. My name is on the deed. My family built this place. You just live here. You cannot sell our home. I can and I am. Betty is drawing up the papers right now. Velana came running from the house. She had been listening from the window. You cannot do this. We have rights, Frank laughed, but it was not a happy sound. Rights? What rights? You told me I was a burden and needed to move to an old folks' home. You assumed everything I owned would just become yours. But I'm still alive and I'm still the legal owner of this property. But where will we live? Velana asked. Her voice was high and scared. That's your problem? You're smart aliens with advanced technology. Figure it out. Zektara's hands moved in angry gestures. This is not how family treats family. You're right, Frank said. Family doesn't call each other burdens. Family doesn't try to throw each other away when they become inconvenient. I learned that lesson from you. You are being unreasonable. I'm being practical. The TDI is paying me 3 times what this land is worth because they need it fast. That money will take care of me for the rest of my life. I won't be anyone's burden ever again. Frank walked toward the house, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and all that fancy Caltharian technology you installed. That comes with me too, since I paid for all of it. The food maker, the holographic systems, the climate controls, everything. It's all in my name on the purchase receipts. Velana looked like she might faint, but we need those things. We cannot live like primitive humans. Then you better learn fast. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live before the TDI takes possession. Frank went inside and closed the door. Zektara and Velana stood in the yard staring at their house like they had never seen it before. That night, Frank lay in his bed and listened to them arguing in their room. They argued in their own language now, sharp clicking sounds and low hums that meant anger and fear. The children were crying. He could hear little Kexra sobbing through the walls. Frank felt bad for the children, but not bad enough to change his mind. They would learn an important lesson about how actions have consequences. Maybe they would grow up to treat people better than their parents did. He picked up his phone and called a number from the card Colonel Sullivan had left. Morrison, he said when someone answered. I accept the job offer. The next morning, Frank started packing his clothes and books and personal things. He worked slowly and carefully, taking only what belonged to him alone. The photo albums went in boxes, his father's tools went in bags. His mother's dishes got wrapped in newspaper. Zektar watched from the doorway. Where will you go? I found a nice apartment in town. Small but perfect for one person, but you will be alone. Frank looked up from packing his books. I've been alone for years, son. I just didn't realize it until now. We can talk about this. We can find another way. Frank shook his head. No, you made your choice when you called me a burden. Now I'm making mine. The papers were signed that afternoon. The ranch that had been in Frank's family for 90 years now belonged to the Terran Defense Initiative. Frank Morrison was no longer a landowner, but he was also no longer anyone's burden. Frank's new apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building in downtown Bozeman. It had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a small kitchen that looked out on Main Street. After 40 years on the ranch, the sounds of traffic and people felt strange, but not unwelcome. Betty helped him move his boxes and furniture. His old recliner fit perfectly by the window where he could watch the world go by. It's cozy, Betty said as she looked around the small space. It's mine, Frank replied. Every inch of it belongs to me, and no one can call me a burden for living in it. 3 weeks after Frank moved out, Colonel Sullivan's construction crews arrived at the ranch. They came with big machines and trailers full of equipment. Zektar and his family watched from their temporary home in a cheap motel as bulldozers began clearing land for the new training facility Velana had tried to use her alien connections to stop the sale. She contacted the Caltharian Trade Council and the Galactic Development Board. She filed complaints with the Interspecies Relations Office, but every agency told her the same thing. Frank Morrison was the legal owner of the property and had every right to sell it to whoever he chose, but we are refugees. She argued over the communication device in their motel room. We have rights under the Galactic Protection Treaty. The Caltharian official on the screen looked bored. You are not refugees. You chose to live with a human family member by your own free will. That family member has chosen to end the arrangement. This is a private domestic matter, not a diplomatic issue. Zektar's trading business started having problems. Word spread quickly through the alien community about how he had treated his human father. Other Caltharian traders began avoiding him. His regular customers stopped returning his calls. The reputation he had built over 20 years was crumbling because no one wanted to do business with someone who had no honor. Why does everyone care so much about one old human? Valana asked as another client canceled their order. Because that old human raised me from childhood, Zektar said quietly. Everyone knows Frank Morrison saved my life and gave me a home. And a future. And everyone knows I threw him away when he became inconvenient. Meanwhile, Frank was discovering things about himself he had forgotten. Dr. Helen Carter was a xenobiologist who worked with the TDI, studying human-alien interactions. She came to his apartment one afternoon with a briefcase full of scientific instruments. Mr. Morrison, I hope you don't mind, but Colonel Sullivan asked me to run some tests. We're studying humans who have had long-term close contact with alien species. Frank made her coffee and sat in his recliner while she set up her equipment. What kind of tests? Simple things? Blood work, brain scans, reflex tests. We're finding that humans who live closely with certain alien species develop interesting adaptations. She took samples and ran scans while they talked. Frank told her about finding Zektar as a child and raising him through his difficult teenage years, about learning Caltharian customs and helping his son navigate human society. Remarkable, Dr. Carter said as she looked at her readings. Your blood chemistry shows traces of Caltharian biomarkers. Your brain activity has patterns I've only seen in telepathic species. And your cellular regeneration rate is about 30% higher than normal for your age. What does that mean? It means that living with Zektar's family changed you on a biological level. Caltharian pheromones and telepathic emanations can enhance human cognitive function and extend lifespan. You're not just an old man, Mr. Morrison. You're a human who has been accidentally enhanced by alien contact. Frank stared at her. Enhanced? Your reflexes are faster than they should be. Your memory is sharper. Your immune system is stronger. And based on these readings, you'll probably live another 30 years in good health. So I'm not the burden they thought I was. Dr. Carter packed up her instruments. Mr. Morrison, you're one of the most biologically interesting humans I've ever studied. The TDI would love to have you work with us as a consultant. We need someone who understands both human and alien psychology from personal experience. That evening, Frank called Colonel Sullivan and accepted the consulting position. The next day, he reported to the construction site that used to be his ranch and began helping design facilities that would allow humans and aliens to train together effectively. Zektar drove by the construction site several times but never stopped. He watched his adoptive father walking around the work site with military officers and alien advisors, clearly respected and valued for his knowledge. The man his family had called a burden was now being treated as an expert by people who mattered. The children missed their grandfather terribly. Little Kexra cried every night in their cramped motel room. Morlin became angry and distant, blaming his parents for losing the only home he had ever known. I want to see Grandpa Frank, Kexra said for the 100th time. You cannot, Valana snapped. He abandoned us. No, Morlin said firmly. We abandoned him first. The motel room felt smaller every day. The food was terrible compared to what Frank used to cook for them. The other guests complained about the alien family living there. Valana realized how much Frank had done to protect them from human prejudice over the years. He had been their shield against a world that often viewed aliens with suspicion. We need to apologize, Zektar said one night after the children had finally fallen asleep. Apologize? He is the one who threw us out of our home. It was never our home, Valana. It was his home and he let us live there. There's a difference. You are taking his side? Zektar looked out the motel window at the neon lights of the city. I'm finally understanding what we lost when we called him a burden. Frank's first day as an official TDI consultant went better than he expected. He worked with human engineers and alien technicians to design training facilities that would accommodate different species' needs. His years of experience making his ranch house work for both human and Caltharian families proved invaluable. The mess hall needs separate food preparation areas, he explained to the architects. Caltharian digestive systems can't process most human spices and human taste buds can't handle Caltharian protein supplements. How do you know so much about this? One of the engineers asked. Frank smiled. I cooked for an alien family for 25 years. You learn things when you don't want your loved ones to get sick from your cooking. By the end of the week, everyone on the project was coming to Frank for advice about human-alien integration issues. He was no longer just a consultant. He was becoming the heart of the entire operation. The Caltharian cultural ceremony was held in the community center downtown on a cold October evening. Frank attended as part of his TDI consulting duties, wearing his best suit and the translation device that would let him understand the formal proceedings. These ceremonies happened twice a year when traveling Caltharian judges visited Earth to handle legal matters for their people living among humans. Elder Morthak was ancient even by Caltharian standards. His blue skin had turned almost silver with age, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived for 3 centuries. He sat on a raised platform while the local Caltharian community gathered before him with their disputes and questions. Frank sat in the back with other human observers. He had not expected to be called forward when Zektar suddenly stood and requested an audience with the elder. I seek judgment on a family matter, Zektar announced in the formal Caltharian language. Elder Morthak's ancient eyes found Frank. In the crowd, approach both parties to the dispute. Frank walked to the front of the room feeling confused. Zektar stood beside him but would not meet his eyes. State your case, the elder commanded. Zektar spoke in rapid Caltharian, telling his version of events. He claimed that Frank had violated family honor by selling their home without consultation. He said Frank had abandoned his duty as an elder to provide guidance and wisdom to the family. He asked the elder to order Frank to return the property and resume his proper role as family patriarch. When Zektar finished, the elder turned to Frank. Do you understand the accusations against you? Frank's translation device had captured every word. I understand them, but I don't agree with them. Tell me what happened in your own words. Frank spoke simply and directly. He told about finding Zektar as a dying child and raising him with love and patience. He described building additions to his family home to accommodate his alien son's needs. He explained about being called a burden and told to move to an elderly care facility while his family assumed ownership of everything he had worked to build. The room was silent when Frank finished speaking. Even the human observers could feel the tension in the air. Elder Morthak was quiet for a long time, his silver eyes studying both men. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries. Young Zektar, you speak of family honor, but you show ignorance of your own people's laws. When you declared your adoptive father a burden, you activated the ancient right of separation. Under Caltharian law, an elder who is rejected by his family may claim all resources he provided, and sever all obligations to those who rejected him. Zektar's face went pale. But elder, I did not know... Ignorance of law does not excuse violation of law. Your human father acted within his rights under both human and Caltharian legal traditions. He owed you nothing after you cast him aside. Velana stood up from her seat in the audience. But we are his family. We have rights. The elder's gaze turned to her like a laser beam. You have no rights you did not earn through honor and respect. This human took a dying Caltharian child and raised him as his own son. He gave freely of his resources and his love for 25 years. When that son declared him a burden, the debt was paid and the obligation ended. Moralen and Kexra sat with their mother, watching their grandfather with wide eyes. Frank had not spoken to them since the day he moved out, though he thought about them every day. Moreover, the elder continued, this human's actions have brought honor to both species. His work with your military creates bridges between our peoples. His knowledge helps others avoid the mistakes this family has made. He is not a burden, but a treasure that was foolishly discarded. Frank felt tears in his eyes, but he stood straight and proud. Zektar of the trading clan Veltar, the elder said formally, you have shamed yourself and your family line. Your business failures are the natural consequence of your dishonorable actions. No Caltharian of good standing will associate with one who abandons family duty. But what can I do to make this right? Zektar asked desperately. You can ask forgiveness, not as a right, but as a gift that may or may not be given. You can accept responsibility for your actions and their consequences. You can work to rebuild the honor you have lost through years of proper conduct. But you cannot undo what has been done. The ceremony continued with other matters, but Frank barely heard them. When it ended, he walked outside into the cold night air and stood on the steps of the community center. Zek single quotes. Tar followed him. Frank, What do you want from me? Frank asked quietly. I want to apologize. I want to make this right somehow. Frank looked at the alien he had raised from childhood. You can't make it right, Zektar? You can't unsay words or undo actions. You called me a burden in front of your children. You made me feel worthless and unwanted in my own home. I was wrong. I was stupid and selfish and wrong. Yes, you were. They stood in silence for several minutes. Other people from the ceremony walked past them into the night. The children miss you, Zektar said finally. Frank's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. I miss them too. They ask about you every day. Kexra cries herself to sleep. Moralin barely speaks to us anymore. That's not my fault. I know, nothing that happened is your fault. It's all mine. Frank started walking toward his truck. Zektar walked beside him. I received an offer today, Frank said as they reached the parking lot. An offer? The TDI wants me to establish a new program on the Caltharian homeworld. An interspecies family counseling service to help prevent situations like ours. It would be a 3-year assignment? Zektar stopped walking. You would leave Earth? Frank turned to face his adopted son. At 70 years old, I'm about to embark on the greatest adventure of my life. I'm going to help other families learn what we failed to learn. I'm going to make sure no other human elder gets treated like a burden and no other alien child loses the wisdom of their adoptive parent. When do you leave? Next month. Zektar was quiet for a long time. Could we would you consider the program would need local guides and cultural interpreters, people who understand both human and Caltharian ways. Frank studied his son's face in the streetlight. What are you asking? I'm asking if there might be room for a disgraced trader and his family to help with your work. Not as family, not as people who have rights to your generosity. As employees who would earn their place through honest work. Frank got into his truck and started the engine. He rolled down the window and looked at Zektar one more time. Come see me tomorrow at my office. Bring your resume and references. I'll consider your application along with all the others. He drove away, leaving Zektar standing alone in the parking lot under the cold Montana stars. The Caltharian homeworld of Velthara looked like a blue jewel against the black of space. Frank pressed his face to the transport ship's window and watched the planet grow larger as they approached. After 70 years of life on Earth, he was finally leaving his home solar system. The boy who had once been called a burden was now traveling to an alien world as one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies. Family dynamics. 6 months had passed since the cultural ceremony where Elder Morthek had delivered his judgment. Frank had spent that time preparing for his new role while Zektar and his family worked to rebuild their lives and their reputation. It had not been easy for any of them. Zektar had applied for a position with Frank's program just like any other candidate. Frank interviewed him formally and checked his references carefully. The recommendation letters were mixed. Some praised Zektar's knowledge of human culture and his translation skills. Others mentioned his recent family troubles and questioned his judgment. In the end, Frank hired him not as a favor but because Zektar was genuinely qualified for the job. His years of living between human and Caltharian worlds had given him insights that would be valuable for counseling other mixed families. Valana took longer to adjust to their new circumstances. She had been forced to find work for the first time in her adult life when Zektar's trading business collapsed. She got a job at the local alien community center helping new refugees navigate human bureaucracy. The work was humbling, but it taught her to appreciate the challenges that ordinary people faced every day. The children had been the bridge between Frank and his former family. Little Kexra started visiting Frank's apartment after school, bringing her homework and asking for help with her human studies. Moreland joined them after a few weeks. Hungry for the grandfather's attention he had lost, Frank had been careful not to undermine their parents' authority. He helped with schoolwork and listened to their problems, but always sent them home for dinner. He was building a new relationship with them based on mutual respect rather than obligation. "Why did you really hire Dad to work with you?" Moreland had asked one day while they worked on a science project together. Frank had considered his words carefully. "Because everyone deserves a chance to do better than they did before? Your father made mistakes, but he's trying to learn from them. That's what good people do when they mess up." Now they were all together on the transport ship heading to Velthara. Frank had his own cabin as the program director. Zektar and his family shared a larger suite as his cultural liaisons and interpreters. They were colleagues now rather than family, but it was a start. The Caltharian homeworld was more beautiful than Frank had imagined. Crystal cities rose from purple plains under 3 different colored suns. The air smelled of flowers and spices he had never encountered on Earth. Alien birds flew in formations that looked like living art against the colorful sky. Frank's program was based in the capital city of Morthic, where the planetary government maintained its offices for interspecies affairs. His team included humans, Caltharians, and representatives from 6 other species that commonly formed mixed families. Their job was to prevent the kind of cultural misunderstandings that had torn Frank's own family apart. The first case they handled involved a human woman who had married a Caltharian man and was struggling to understand her teenage stepchildren. The children spoke only in their native language around her and refused to eat human food. The woman felt excluded and unwanted in her own home. Frank sat across from the family in his new office and listened to their story. He recognized the patterns immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, have you learned any Caltharian language?" he asked. "I've tried, but it's so difficult. All those clicking sounds and humming tones. I can't make my throat work that way." Frank turned to the Caltharian husband. "And have you taught your children any human customs?" "They know English for school. That should be enough." Frank leaned back in his chair. "What I'm hearing is 2 separate families trying to live in the same house instead of one blended family learning to live together. That never works," he explained. How he had learned Caltharian customs when raising Zektar, and how Zektar had learned human ways. Both sides had to make an effort or the relationship would fail. The children need to see their stepmother as a real parent, not just someone who lives with their father. And you, Mrs. Patterson, need to understand that learning their language and customs isn't just nice. It's necessary if you want to be part of their lives." Zektar translated when the children struggled with complex English concepts. He shared his own experience of learning to balance 2 different cultures. Velana talked about the challenges she had faced adapting to human society, and the mistakes she had made along the way. By the end of the session, the family had a plan for moving forward. The children would teach their stepmother basic Caltharian phrases in exchange for cooking lessons. The parents would establish family meetings where everyone could express their concerns in a safe environment. "Will it work?" Mrs. Patterson asked as they prepared to leave. Frank smiled. "It will work if everyone commits to making it work. Family isn't about biology or legal papers. It's about choosing to care for each other even when it's difficult." Over the following months, Frank's program helped dozens of families navigate cultural differences and communication problems. Word spread quickly through the interspecies community that there was finally a place where mixed families could get real help from people who understood their struggles. Frank found himself busier and more fulfilled than he had been in years. His enhanced cognitive abilities, the result of decades of exposure to Caltharian biology, made him uniquely qualified for the complex work of cultural mediation. He could think faster, remember more details, and see patterns that others missed. Zektar proved to be an excellent counselor. His experience of being raised between two worlds gave him insight into the challenges that hybrid families faced. He worked especially well with teenage aliens who were struggling to fit into human society or human children trying to understand alien step-parents. Valana surprised everyone, including herself, by becoming the program's most effective mediator for couples in crisis. Her own mistakes with Frank had taught her to recognize the warning signs when families started pulling apart. She could spot the moment when love began turning into resentment and help couples change course before it was too late. One evening, as Frank was finishing his reports in his office, Kexra knocked on his door. She was 10 now and growing tall like her Caltharian relatives, but she still had the curious eyes of a child. "Grandpa Frank, can I ask you something?" Frank gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Of course. Do you still love us?" Frank set down his stylus and looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after everything that happened? After Mom and Dad were mean to you and made you leave the ranch? Do you still love us like you used to?" Frank was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with care. "Kexra, love isn't something you can turn on and off like a light switch. I will always love you and your brother. You're my grandchildren and nothing can change that." "But what about Mom and Dad? That's more complicated." "I love who your father used to be when he was young and needed me. I'm learning to respect who he's becoming now that he's trying to do better. Love and respect aren't always the same thing." "Are we a family again?" Frank walked around his desk and knelt down so he was at her eye level. "We're something new. We're people who care about each other and work together and try to help other families be happy. Maybe that's better than what we were before." Kexra hugged him tightly. "I think it's better too." 6 months later, Frank received a message that changed everything. The Galactic Council had voted to expand his family counseling program to 12 different worlds. They wanted him to train a new generation of counselors who could work with dozens of different species combinations. Frank stood in his office, looking out at the alien city he had come to think of as home, and made his decision. At 71 years old, he was going to become a teacher. The graduation ceremony for Frank's first class of interspecies family counselors was held in the Great Hall of the Caltharian Parliament building. Representatives from 20 different species attended to honor the humans and aliens who had completed the intensive training program. Frank stood at the podium looking out at faces that represented every corner of the galaxy. Some had skin like metal, others had feathers instead of hair. There were beings who breathed methane and others who lived underwater. But they all had one thing in common. They had all learned to build bridges between different worlds and different ways of thinking. "When I was 68 years old," Frank began, "my own family called me a burden and asked me to leave the home I had built for them. I thought my useful life was over. I thought I had nothing left to offer anyone." He paused and found Zektar in the audience. His adopted son was sitting with Valana and the children, all of them wearing the formal robes of program graduates. "I was wrong. My most important work was just beginning. All of you graduating today will go out into the galaxy and help families learn what my family learned the hard way. You'll teach them that love requires effort and respect requires understanding.